tariffs. It's not up to you. You're not the president.
Script Karoline Leavitt just snapped, and now her reaction is going viral. But this wasn't random. It came right after Chris Rock mocked her marriage on live TV. For months, Karoline's been under fire, thanks to her 32-year age gap marriage and constant criticism from pundits and trolls. But now, she's done staying quiet. Her explosive reaction is all anyone's talking about. Let's get into it. Chris Rock caused an absolute meltdown among Republicans. Before we dive into Karoline Leavitt's explosive reaction, let's rewind to the moment that lit the fuse. It all started when Chris Rock took the stage and did what he does best, push buttons. Only this time, his target wasn't just a celebrity or a trending topic. No, he went straight for the jugular of MAGA royalty, zeroing in on one of the most awkward dynamics in American politics, Donald and Melania Trump's marriage. I mean, let's be honest, we've all had those thoughts when we see Melania's facial expressions at official events, right? That carefully curated, I'm physically here, but mentally I'm calculating my divorce settlement expression that's become her signature look. But leave it to Chris Rock to say out loud what the rest of us have been thinking for years. Rock didn't just make a passing joke or two. He constructed an entire segment of his routine around what he sees as the bizarre public spectacle of the Trump marriage. And he didn't just focus on the standard orange makeup jokes or hair comments that we've all heard a million times. No, Rock went straight for what he perceives as the fragile ego underneath all that bluster.
Ain't nothing gonna happen to Trump, man. Nothing's gonna happen to Trump. Here's the crazy thing. It might just work out. Trump might work out.
Chris Rock compared Trump's marriage to one of those weird contractual arrangements where Melania pretends to love him and he pretends not to notice. The comedian really hit a nerve when he pointed out how Trump treats Melania like just another piece of Trump-branded property. Ouch, that's the kind of brutal honesty that only someone like Rock can deliver with such precision. Bro essentially described Melania as a human Trump sign who looks expensive, doesn't say much, and probably wants to fall over. Now that's the kind of savage commentary that would make anyone wince, even if you're not the target. But Rock wasn't done there. He took his surgical comedy scalpel and cut even deeper, suggesting that the Trump marriage contract probably has more clauses than the Constitution, including a no refund policy. I mean, can you imagine being in that audience? The tension mixed with uncontrollable laughter as Rock just kept pushing the envelope further and further. The joke that apparently sent Trump over the edge was when Rock compared him to a desperate reality TV star who can't accept cancellation.
So bad, he gave us Obama. Shit, Trump's so bad, he gonna give us Jesus.
Rock implied that Trump was like that guy from a show that got canceled 4 years ago, but he's still walking around in costume introducing himself as the character. The audience apparently gave that particular burn a standing ovation, which you know had to sting for someone as image conscious as Trump. What makes Rock's comedy so effective isn't just that he's funny, it's that he has this uncanny ability to strip away facades and expose what he sees as the truth underneath. In this case, he wasn't just making jokes about Trump's appearance or policies. He was attacking the very image Trump has carefully constructed about his marriage and personal life. The contrast between Rock's confident delivery and Trump's well-documented insecurity couldn't be more stark. Rock stood on stage, completely comfortable in his own skin, while describing a man who needs constant reassurance that he's the best, the greatest, the most perfect husband America has ever seen. According to sources close to the situation, Trump was absolutely livid about Rock's routine. He was rumored to call his allies at 3 in the morning to rant about it. That's how deeply these jokes cut. Can you imagine being some Republican congressman, sound asleep, when your phone starts buzzing at 3 a.m. with an angry Trump on the other end, complaining about a Netflix special? Talk about a rude awakening. And that's where our protagonist, or antagonist, depending on your political leanings, enters the picture. Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in American history at just 27 years old, was thrust into the spotlight to defend her boss and the First Lady from this comedy onslaught. Now, what's particularly interesting about this whole situation is the context behind Leavitt's defense. You see, as White House press secretary, her job is to respond to media and public criticisms that affect the administration or First Lady. She's essentially the shield that takes the hits, so the president and First Lady don't have to. But this particular defense came with some interesting subtext. Why? Well, that brings us to the absolutely fascinating irony of this whole situation. While Leavitt was defending Melania Trump from jokes about her marriage, she herself has been at the center of intense public scrutiny about her own relationship. And that relationship, it's got people talking for reasons that might make her defense of the Trump marriage all the more personal. But before we dive into that intriguing angle, let's take a step back and really appreciate the comedy dynamics at play here. What is it about marriage jokes that hit so hard for political figures? Why did these particular comments from Rock trigger such an explosive response? And what does it tell us about the fragility of carefully constructed public images in the political sphere? Think about it. Other presidents have handled being the butt of jokes with much more grace. Obama laughed at himself during White House correspondence dinners. Bush Jr. embraced his reputation for malapropisms. Even Nixon appeared on Laugh-In. But Trump? The evidence suggests he has the emotional resilience of a chocolate teacup in a sauna when it comes to comedy about his personal life. And that, my friends, brings us to the most fascinating question of all. Why would jokes about one's marriage trigger such an extreme reaction? What nerve did Rock hit that caused such a meltdown? And why would Karoline Leavitt, of all people, be the one to mount such a vigorous defense of the Trump marriage? Well, that's where our story takes an even more interesting turn. Because to understand Leavitt's reaction, we need to understand something about her own personal life that makes this whole situation deliciously ironic. Karoline Leavitt's controversial marriage. You see, while Leavitt was busy defending Melania Trump from jokes about her marriage, she herself has been the subject of intense public fascination, and yes, criticism over her own relationship. And the parallels? They're absolutely fascinating. Karoline Leavitt, at just 27 years old, is married to a man named Nicholas Riccio, who is, wait for it, 59 years old. That's right, there's a 32-year age gap between Leavitt and her husband, which has sparked widespread discussion and controversy since she stepped into the public eye as Trump's press secretary. Let that sink in for a moment. Leavitt herself has acknowledged the unusual nature of her relationship, describing it as an atypical love story during her appearance on the Megyn Kelly show earlier this year. When asked about the age difference, Leavitt didn't shy away from addressing it directly.
And was there any I can't date him, he's 59
yes,
or 57,
of course.
whatever.
I mean, it's very atypical love story, but he's incredible. He's my greatest supporter. He's my best friend. He's my rock.
The timing of their relationship adds another layer of interest to this story. Leavitt and Riccio tied the knot in January 2025, just days before Trump's second inauguration. They welcomed their son, Nicholas Robert Riccio, nicknamed Nico, on July 10th, 2024, after announcing their engagement during the Christmas holiday in 2023. So this is all very recent, very public, and very much subject to the kind of scrutiny that comes with being in the political spotlight. But what makes this particularly relevant to our discussion about Chris Rock's comedy routine is the nature of the public conversation surrounding Leavitt's marriage. The 32-year age difference hasn't just raised eyebrows, it's sparked significant debate and yes, rumors. Some sources, such as an article from women.com published on March 22nd, 2025, have highlighted potential red flags in their relationship, focusing on the age gap as a possible source of power imbalances. The article cites expert opinions, noting that significant age differences can lead to issues, particularly if one partner was young when the relationship began. In fact, women.com pointed out several red flags in their relationship dynamic, starting with the striking 32-year age gap between Leavitt and Riccio. Their personalities also seem to clash. Leavitt comes off as outgoing and extroverted, while Riccio is described as more introverted and reserved. Then there's the social media divide. Leavitt maintains an active online presence, whereas Riccio reportedly avoids it altogether, and perhaps most notably, there's concern about a potential power imbalance, with Riccio's career possibly being overshadowed by Leavitt's high-profile role. But the public discussion doesn't stop at thoughtful analysis of relationship dynamics. Oh no, the internet, as always, has taken things much further with speculation and rumors that range from curious to downright cruel. Social media platforms like X, formerly Twitter, have been particularly active with discussions about Leavitt's marriage. Some users have suggested financial motivations behind the relationship. For instance, an X post by @RyanShed stated, Karoline Leavitt, 27, married a 60-year-old real estate developer in 2023 and promptly had a child. I'm sure his money had nothing to do with it. At least we know how she got the job now. Similarly, comments on platforms like Reddit have included speculation about gold digging for money or career funding. Riccio, it should be noted, is a successful real estate developer with significant holdings in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and the White Mountains, which may fuel these kinds of speculations. The age gap has also led to more concerning rumors about potential power imbalances or even grooming allegations that are particularly serious, and, it must be emphasized, completely unsubstantiated by any evidence. Reddit comments have included speculation about the timeline of their relationship, though these remain firmly in the realm of internet conjecture rather than verified fact. Some X users have highlighted the age gap in ways that imply concerns about the relationship's long-term viability, such as one by @ArtCandy, who mentioned the age gap in the context of when she graduated high school and when their son will graduate. There have even been unfounded claims about Riccio's background and character. A Reddit comment called him an Italian-Jewish mobster slumlord, though no specific details or evidence were provided to support this characterization. This rumor seems to stem from his background as a real estate developer with a history of overcoming homelessness, but it remains entirely speculative. Perhaps Perhaps most cruelly, some online commentators have questioned whether the marriage itself is genuine, with baseless suggestions about Leavitt's personal life that have absolutely no factual basis. Another ex-post claimed he's allegedly rich and got her the job because he's buddies with Trump, suggesting their relationship might be transactional in nature. Again, these are unsubstantiated rumors that circulate in the wilds of social media without evidence to back them up. Now, to be absolutely clear, these rumors and speculations should be treated exactly as what they are: unverified, often mean-spirited internet chatter that may have little basis in reality. The point isn't to give credence to these rumors, but rather to illustrate the kind of public scrutiny that Leavitt's marriage has been subjected to. And this brings us back to the delicious irony of our original story. Here's Karoline Leavitt defending the Trump marriage from jokes by Chris Rock, while her own marriage has been the subject of intense public discussion, speculation, and yes, mockery. Talk about living in a glass house while throwing stones. It's worth noting that Leavitt has addressed the age gap directly in interviews, describing Riccio as her greatest supporter, best friend, and rock. She's acknowledged that she had initial doubts about the relationship due to the age difference, but has emphasized their strong personal bond. The story of how they met is also quite interesting. According to Leavitt's own account, they met during her congressional campaign when a mutual friend hosted an event at a restaurant owned by Riccio in New Hampshire. This counters some of the more conspiratorial speculations about secretive or inappropriate beginnings to their relationship. What's particularly fascinating about Riccio is his background story. He had a challenging early life, including periods of housing insecurity and living on the streets by age 18. His journey from adversity to becoming a multimillionaire real estate developer, starting with investments in the early 2000s, particularly in Hampton Beach, New Hampshire, is quite remarkable. By 2015, he had established a significant presence in the East Coast real estate market, with holdings spanning several states. This rags to riches story has intrigued the public, especially given his connection to Leavitt's political career. Riccio supported her 2022 congressional campaign financially, though she ultimately lost to Democrat Chris Pappas. So here we have a fascinating parallel. While Chris Rock was joking about Melania Trump being in a marriage that resembles a business transaction and suggesting she signed up to be a billionaire's trophy wife, Leavitt herself has been the subject of similar insinuations about her own relationship with a much older, wealthy man. The question then becomes, was Leavitt's vigorous defense of the Trump marriage partially informed by her own experiences with public scrutiny? Was there a personal dimension to her reaction that went beyond her professional responsibilities as press secretary? And that brings us to perhaps the most interesting aspect of Karoline Leavitt as a political figure, because the controversy surrounding her marriage is far from the only thing that's made her a lightning rod for public attention since taking on the role of White House press secretary. Beyond the marriage, Karoline Leavitt's controversial political profile. At just 27 years old, Karoline Leavitt is the youngest White House press secretary in U.S. history, serving under President Donald Trump in 2025. Her youth alone would make her noteworthy, but it's her handling of various political hot potatoes that has truly put her in the spotlight, and not always in a positive way. One of the most significant controversies surrounding Leavitt involves her connection to Project 2025, a right-wing policy initiative developed by the Heritage Foundation that aims to provide a blueprint for conservative governance. Despite publicly stating in August 2024 that Project 2025 has nothing to do with our campaign, evidence emerged showing that Leavitt had contributed to the project's Conservative Governance 101 Inches training program. She even appeared in a training video titled The Art of Professionalism, where she discussed her experiences in the Trump White House. This discrepancy between her public disavowal and her actual involvement has raised questions about transparency and potential conflicts of interest, fueling debate among critics and supporters alike. But the Project 2025 controversy is merely the tip of the iceberg. Leavitt's 2022 congressional campaign was marred by finance violations that continue to haunt her. Reports indicate she accepted and spent at least $200,000 of approximately $300,000 in excessive contributions that she failed to report properly. Even more concerning, she's only recently made efforts to repay some of these funds, including to her own parents. This issue was highlighted by Notice and has been criticized as demonstrating a lack of financial transparency, adding to perceptions of ethical concerns in her political career. It's particularly problematic for someone in the role of press secretary, where credibility and transparency are supposed to be paramount values. Another controversy that has dogged Leavitt involves her shifting stance on the January 6, 2021 Capitol rioters. During her 2022 campaign, she took a hard line, stating that the rioters did not represent the America First movement and should be prosecuted. However, in her role as press secretary, she's done a complete 180, defending Trump's pardon of over 1,600 individuals charged with related crimes and describing them as held hostage by the Biden Department of Justice. This reversal has been seen as inconsistent at best and cynically opportunistic at worst, drawing criticism from those who view it as a political shift designed solely to align with Trump's agenda rather than reflecting genuine conviction. Leavitt's handling of White House press briefings has also been a source of ongoing controversy. Her first briefing in January 2025 was marked by a confrontational tone, where she warned veteran reporters of their declining relevance and emphasized the importance of new media outlets. This approach set a combative tone that has characterized her relationship with the traditional press corps. She's faced particularly pointed criticism for struggling to answer questions about Trump's use of presidential power. In one memorable exchange, she appeared flustered when asked whether Trump was abusing his authority by ordering investigations into political opponents like Chris Krebs. Her inability to provide a clear response to this straightforward question about executive power limitations raised eyebrows across the political spectrum. In March 2025, Leavitt found herself in hot water over the Signal leak scandal, where government plans were accidentally leaked via a group chat. When questioned about this security breach, Leavitt was notably evasive, refusing to rule out firings while also declining to classify the leaked information as sensitive. This response has been widely criticized as lacking transparency and undermining public trust. In fact, her handling of the situation was so poorly received that one outlet reported she abruptly cut short press conference and runs away when pressed on the issue. Not exactly the kind of headline that inspires confidence in a press secretary's ability to manage difficult questions. Leavitt's stance on election integrity has also raised eyebrows for its apparent hypocrisy. During her 2022 campaign, she promoted the widely debunked claim that the 2020 election was stolen from Trump, often referred to as the big lie. However, when asked how she could be confident in her own election's integrity given these claims, she reportedly abruptly ended an interview rather than address the apparent contradiction. This unwillingness to reconcile her position on the 2020 election with her acceptance of the results of her own race has been cited as evidence of inconsistency in her stance on election integrity. It's a pattern that critics argue undermines her credibility as a spokesperson for the administration. Even more recently, in April 2025, Leavitt made statements during a new media briefing suggesting Trump was trolling about running for president again in 2028, despite Trump himself insisting he was not joking about the possibility. This discrepancy between her characterization and Trump's own words was seen as a significant misstep for someone whose job is to accurately represent the president's positions. What makes all of these controversies particularly noteworthy is Leavitt's youth and rapid rise in politics. As noted in a Politico profile, her role has been characterized as prioritizing loyalty to Trump over traditional press relations. Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, has described the current tension between the administration and the press as open hostility, with Leavitt seemingly more focused on attacking journalists than engaging with legitimate questions. This approach has polarized opinions, with critics viewing her as inexperienced and out of her depth, while supporters praise her as a fresh voice willing to challenge what they see as media bias against the Trump administration. But what's particularly fascinating about Leavitt's tenure is how she's prioritized certain media outlets over others, establishing what some have called a two-tier press system. In her first briefing, she emphasized giving preference to new media outlets, which tend to be more favorable to the Trump administration. This strategy has effectively created an echo chamber where sympathetic outlets get preferential treatment, while critical voices are marginalized. This approach stands in stark contrast to the traditional role of the press secretary, which has historically been to provide accurate information to the entire press corps, regardless of their political leanings. By creating this two-tier system, Leavitt has been accused of undermining the very concept of a free press, turning the press secretary role into something more akin to a propaganda position. Another aspect of Leavitt's controversy-laden tenure is her handling of the administration's major policy initiatives. When questioned about specifics regarding Trump's economic plans or foreign policy decisions, she's often defaulted to vague statements or deflections, leading to frustration among reporters trying to get clear answers for the American public. This pattern has led some to question whether she's fully briefed on administration policies or simply avoiding difficult questions. There's also the matter of her social media presence, which has become a flashpoint for controversy. Unlike previous press secretaries who maintained a more professional online persona, Leavitt has used her personal accounts to attack journalists, mock political opponents, and share content that many have found inappropriate for someone in her position. This blurring of personal and professional boundaries has only added to perceptions that she lacks the maturity and judgment traditionally expected in her role. It's also worth noting the stark contrast between Leavitt's Leavitt's handling of her position and how previous press secretaries approached the job, where predecessors like Jen Psaki, Kayleigh McEnany, or even Sean Spicer attempted to maintain at least a veneer of professionalism in their briefings. Leavitt has embraced a more combative, partisan approach that some observers have described as reality TV politics, rather than serious governance. This approach has consequences beyond just media relations. When a press secretary fails to provide clear, accurate information about the administration's actions and policies, it affects the public's understanding of their government. When transparency is sacrificed for political expediency, democratic accountability suffers. When we consider all of these controversies together, from Project 2025 and campaign finance violations to her shifting stance on January 6th, her combative approach to press relations, her two-tier media system, her social media behavior, her abrupt ending of press conferences, and her troubled relationship with factual accuracy, a picture emerges of a press secretary who has become a lightning rod for criticism from multiple directions. And this brings us back to our original story about Chris Rock's comedy routine and Leavitt's reaction. When we understand the full context of her political profile and the numerous controversies that have surrounded her brief tenure as press secretary, her vigorous defense of the Trump marriage takes on additional dimensions. Was she simply doing her job as press secretary, defending the first family from what she perceived as unfair attacks? Or was there an element of personal resonance given the public scrutiny of her own marriage? Or perhaps it was strategic, an opportunity to shift focus away from the numerous political controversies that have defined her time in the role. The irony is palpable. Chris Rock made jokes about the Trump marriage being a business arrangement, about Melania being a trophy wife in a contractual relationship, about Trump's need for constant validation of his image, and Leavitt, whose own marriage has faced similar speculation and whose political career has been marked by image management challenges, was the one tasked with responding. It's almost as if the universe has a sense of humor. The youngest press secretary in history, married to a man 32 years her senior, defends the marriage of a president to a wife 23 years his junior, from jokes made by a comedian who specializes in exposing uncomfortable truths. The layers of irony are almost too perfect. Well, that's a wrap. If you enjoyed this video, check out these other ones on your screen right now. Thanks for watching. Till next time.
Let me be clear, there will be no unilateral reduction in tariffs against China. The president has made it clear.
Karoline Leavitt's recent live interview was nothing short of a tragedy. It went off the rails almost instantly. She tried to outsmart the media, but instead ended up completely embarrassing herself on a national stage. From what most consider to be inaccurate claims during a White House briefing, to desperate attempts to spin the narrative, she practically handed her critics all the ammunition they needed. Today we're breaking down exactly how it all unraveled, and why it's exploding across the headlines. The rise of controversy. In the turbulent landscape of American politics, few figures have emerged as quickly and controversially as Karoline Leavitt. Today, we're examining a situation that has captivated political commentators and everyday Americans alike. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt's recent press appearance that many are describing as nothing short of catastrophic. As the youngest press secretary in American history at just 27 years old, Leavitt has been a lightning rod for both admiration and scrutiny since assuming her role in January 2025. Before we dissect the disaster that unfolded, it's essential to understand the figure at the center of this political storm. Karoline Leavitt rose quickly through Republican ranks, working in the first Trump administration before an unsuccessful congressional run in New Hampshire in 2022. Despite that electoral defeat, her unwavering loyalty to former President Trump secured her a position in his 2024 campaign and ultimately the prestigious role of White House press secretary. Her rapid ascent has been remarkable, from a small-town New Hampshire upbringing to one of the most visible positions in American politics. Leavitt's communication style has been characterized by a combative approach toward traditional media outlets since day one. In her very first briefing on January 28, 2025, she set a confrontational tone, declaring that Americans' trust in mass media has fallen to a record low and emphasizing the inclusion of what she termed new media, podcasters, influencers, and conservative outlets that might be more sympathetic to the administration's messaging. This strategic shift was immediately evident when she called on Axios's Mike Allen and Breitbart's Matt Boyle before legacy outlets like the Associated Press, breaking decades of protocol and signaling a new era in White House communications. The message was clear. The traditional press would no longer be given the deference they'd grown accustomed to over generations. But what exactly happened during the briefing that has everyone talking? Let's examine the pivotal moments that transformed a routine press conference into what critics are calling a complete meltdown. The controversy centers around what has become known as the Signalgate scandal, a significant security breach where top Trump administration officials accidentally included the Atlantic's editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg in a Signal group chat discussing sensitive military strike plans against the Houthis in Yemen. The leaked messages, published by The Atlantic, revealed conversations about potential military operations, creating a firestorm of questions about the administration's information security protocols. On March 26, 2025, Leavitt held what would become an infamous press conference lasting less than 25 minutes. She began by speaking for under 10 minutes before taking questions that quickly centered on the leaked war plans. From the outset, her defensive posture was evident as she dismissed the Atlantic story as sensationalized and accused Goldberg of being an anti-Trump hater and a registered Democrat. What followed was a masterclass in how not to handle a crisis. Leavitt claimed no classified information had been leaked and that National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who had inadvertently added Goldberg to the chat, had taken responsibility. She mentioned an investigation was underway but provided virtually no specifics, a response that journalists found woefully inadequate given the gravity of the situation. The tension in the room escalated dramatically when CNN's Caitlin Collins attempted to probe deeper, asking if President Trump felt misled by his national security advisors. Leavitt's response was immediate and harsh. Visibly frustrated, she snapped, "I have now been asked and answered this question 3 times by the both of you," refusing to allow a follow-up question and quickly calling on another reporter. This exchange was widely reported as a loss of composure that set the tone for what was to come. As the questioning continued, and it became clear that journalists weren't going to let the Signalgate issue drop, Leavitt made a decision that would define the briefing in public memory. After realizing most questions focused on the scandal, she abruptly ended the conference, citing a need to avoid counter-programming Vice President J.D. Vance's upcoming speech. She also mentioned Trump's scheduled appearances later that day, hastily adding, "Sorry it's a bit shorter today, guys," before making a quick exit from the podium. This premature departure was immediately characterized across social media platforms as her running away from difficult questions. One user on X wrote, "Karoline Leavitt got scared and just ran off the stage after getting grilled by reporters about the Signal chat." Another commented, "Karoline Leavitt practically ran out of that press conference after getting hammered by reporters." These sentiments framed her as unprepared and overwhelmed by the scrutiny she faced. The media response was equally unforgiving. Outlets like the Irish Star and the Mirror US described the event as a humiliation, emphasizing Leavitt's apparent inability to handle tough questions. Some forums even used harsh language, with users calling her a rat running away from danger and criticizing her for gaslighting the public about the leaked plans. Perhaps most damaging to Leavitt's credibility was her insistence that the leaked messages were not war plans, but merely attack plans, a distinction that many viewed as meaningless semantic wordplay. Critics, including the Mirror US, pointed out that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had posted a timeline of the bombing in the chat, directly contradicting her attempts to downplay the severity of the leak. The fallout continued days later. On April 1st, 2025, Leavitt provided what many considered an inadequate update on Signalgate, stating, "This case has been closed here at the White House as far as we are concerned, and that unspecified steps had been taken to prevent future leaks." This vague response only fueled further criticism, with commentators on social media labeling her the resident minister of propaganda for what they perceived as a transparent attempt to sweep a serious national security concern under the rug. The incidents we've explored thus far paint a picture of a press secretary under siege, struggling to maintain control of the narrative amid a major scandal. But the story doesn't end here. In fact, it gets considerably more complicated as Leavitt faced additional controversies in subsequent briefings. How did she handle accusations about spreading misinformation? What happened when she was confronted about controversial immigration policies? And did she manage to recover from her initial stumbles, or did the situation continue to deteriorate? The unraveling. The aftermath of the Signalgate debacle created a challenging environment for Leavitt, with journalists now more determined than ever to hold the administration accountable. Rather than adopting a more measured approach, however, Leavitt doubled down on her combative style, leading to several memorable confrontations that quickly went viral. One particularly notable incident occurred on April 15, 2025, when Leavitt faced questions about the deportation of Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, a Salvadoran immigrant with protected legal status. Instead of addressing the legitimate concerns about this case, Leavitt responded with mockery, saying, "Based on the sensationalism of many of the people in this room, you would think we deported a candidate for Father of the Year." This dismissive comment might have been provocative enough on its own, but Leavitt went further, accusing Garcia of human trafficking without providing any evidence to support this serious allegation. This claim immediately drew backlash from advocacy groups and legal experts, with social media users like at Call to Activism describing her statements as a full-blown meltdown of lies. The situation situation deteriorated further the following day. On April 16, 2025, in what observers described as bizarre behavior, Leavitt initially asked if reporters had questions, but then refused to take any, leading to perceptions that she was tired and defeated. One ex-user, at Lippy Addiction, suggested she was at her breaking point, a sentiment that gained traction as video clips of the awkward moments circulated online. What made these incidents particularly damaging was the growing perception that Leavitt wasn't just struggling under pressure, but actively engaging in deliberate misinformation. Posts on X accused her of using planted stooges in the press room to field softball questions, a claim that gained credibility when the New York Times published an analysis highlighting her reliance on friendly media outlets. Critics described this tactic as authoritarian, with one social media comment stating, "This is how authoritarian states are run." The controversies weren't limited to immigration and media management. Leavitt's handling of economic policy, particularly regarding tariffs, also became a flashpoint. In a Fox News appearance that quickly went viral, she made claims about international trade negotiations that left even the typically friendly Fox hosts visibly confused. In this remarkable exchange, Leavitt attempted to clarify the administration's tariff policy, but instead created more confusion with contradictory statements. The Fox News host directly asked about the timetable for reducing tariffs against China, noting that Trump had been ambiguous about it.
Let me be clear, there will be no unilateral reduction in tariffs against China. The president has made it clear China needs to make a deal with the United States of America, and we are optimistic that will happen.
What made this exchange particularly noteworthy was Leavitt's circular logic, claiming to provide clarity while essentially restating the same ambiguous position that prompted the question in the first place. The Fox host's tepid response, "Okay, well, markets seem to be watching every bit of it," reflected the growing sense that even media outlets typically friendly to the administration were finding it difficult to extract straightforward answers from the press secretary. But perhaps the most eyebrow-raising moment came when Leavitt made an astonishing claim about the number of countries engaged in trade negotiations with the United States.
Too long. And President Trump has brought hundreds of countries now from around the world to the negotiating table. We have 18 proposals on paper from nations around the world who recognize that they have in fact been ripping off the United States.
This statement was immediately flagged by fact checkers as mathematically impossible, given that there are only 195 countries in the world recognized by the United Nations, 193 member states plus 2 non-member observer states. Even accounting for territories or autonomous regions, the claim of hundreds of countries engaging in negotiations was simply not credible. The accuracy issues extended to other policy areas as well. When questioned about immigration statistics during a briefing, Leavitt provided figures that seemed to lack any firm basis in official data.
Well, you'd have to ask the Department of Homeland Security for a specific number, but we suspect it's definitely in the millions, perhaps upwards of 20 million people that were allowed into the country illegally by the previous administration. And the president and his team are focused on deporting as many as we possibly can, and they are moving as quickly as possible.
When pressed to provide specific numbers on how many undocumented immigrants were in the country, Leavitt first deflected by saying, "You'd have to ask the Department of Homeland Security," but then immediately offered a speculative figure of perhaps upwards of 20 million people, a number significantly higher than most credible estimates. This pattern of deflection, followed by unsubstantiated claims, became a hallmark of her briefing style, leaving journalists and viewers alike questioning the reliability of the information being presented. The cumulative effect of these missteps was a growing crisis of credibility. Even conservative media outlets, which had initially celebrated Leavitt's appointment as a breath of fresh air, began to express concerns about her handling of basic facts. Her youth, once touted as an advantage that brought energy and fresh perspective to the role, was increasingly cited as a liability, with critics questioning whether she had the experience necessary to navigate the complexities of White House communications. Adding to the pressure was Leavitt's implementation of controversial changes to press room protocols. In a move that drew sharp criticism from media organizations, she announced that the White House would take control of the briefing room seating chart, stripping the White House Correspondents Association of its traditional role in this process. This decision, which appeared designed to favor pro-Trump and digital-first outlets over legacy media like CNN and NBC, was characterized by critics as a calculated effort to humiliate and sideline traditional journalism. Leavitt defended the change by stating, "It's not about ideology, it's about increasing the wide array of outlets that have access." But many viewed this explanation with skepticism, especially given her previous comments disparaging legacy media. The controversy intensified when it was reported that certain outlets, including the Associated Press, had been barred from the press pool for reportedly ignoring Trump's executive order renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. These structural changes, combined with her confrontational rhetoric and factual inconsistencies created what many observers described as a perfect storm. Rather than fulfilling the traditional role of the press secretary to serve as a bridge between the administration and the public through the media, Leavitt seemed to be constructing walls, limiting access to those deemed friendly while alienating outlets with larger audiences and established journalistic credentials. The situation reached a new level of absurdity on April 17, 2025, when Chinese envoy Zhang Zhisheng pointed out on social media that the red dress with lace that Leavitt wore during a press briefing was made in China, a deeply ironic twist given the administration's tough rhetoric on Chinese imports and tariffs. Weibo posts from Chinese textile workers claiming to have produced the dress in Mabu, China, went viral, with Zhang stating, "Accusing China is business, buying China is life." This fashion faux pas, while seemingly trivial compared to policy matters, became emblematic for critics of what they perceived as the administration's hypocritical stance on trade. As these controversies accumulated, the pressure on Leavitt intensified. Her responses became increasingly defensive, and her body language during briefings suggested growing discomfort. The young press secretary, who had once been lauded for her confidence and poise, now appeared at times to be struggling to maintain her composure in the face of relentless questioning. Yet the worst was still to come. Soon, a series of dramatic incidents pushed the situation from bad to catastrophic, culminating in what many political observers now describe as one of the most disastrous periods for White House communications in recent memory. The question was no longer whether Leavitt could recover her footing, but rather how much more damage would be done before a change of course became inevitable. The aftermath. The combination of the Signalgate debacle, her confrontational media strategy, and the growing list of factual inaccuracies had created a perfect storm of credibility issues. But rather than a course correction, what followed was a series of incidents that further undermined her standing and transformed what might have been salvageable missteps into what many now view as an unmitigated disaster. On April 19, 2025, in what should have been a routine ceremony, Leavitt abruptly ended a briefing due to a medical emergency during Dr. Mehmet Oz's swearing in as administrator for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Witnesses described her shouting "press out" to evacuate reporters, a moment characterized as panicked by media outlets. While this response may have been appropriate given the circumstances, the optics of yet another prematurely terminated briefing reinforced the narrative of a press secretary struggling to maintain control. The following week brought no respite. On April 22, 2025, Leavitt found herself defending Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth amid reports of dismissed Pentagon officials leaking against him. When asked directly if President Trump still had confidence in Hegseth despite the controversies, she responded with unequivocal support.
No travel plans at this time. Doesn't mean it's not happening. I just don't have anything to share. But the president, of course, is aware of the passing of the Pope and did put out a statement this morning. And we're praying for the millions of Christians around the world who love the Pope and admired him this morning. The president absolutely has confidence in Secretary Hegseth. I spoke to him about it this morning, and he stands strongly behind him.
This expression of support was followed by more detailed comments when a reporter pressed her on her claim that the entire Pentagon is working against Secretary Hegseth, despite the fact that the fired officials were Hegseth's own appointees.
They were Pentagon employees who leaked against their boss to news agencies in this room, and it's been clear since day one from this administration that we are not going to tolerate individuals who leak to the mainstream media, particularly when it comes to sensitive information. And the Secretary of Defense is doing a tremendous job, and he is bringing monumental change to the Pentagon.
Her characterization of the fired officials as disloyal leakers contradicted reports that they were part of Hegseth's inner circle, raising questions about her grasp of the situation or willingness to present an accurate picture. More troubling was her blanket dismissal of leaks to the mainstream media as inherently problematic, regardless of the substance or public interest in the information being revealed. This stance on leaks appeared particularly hypocritical given the administration's own challenges with information security, as exemplified by the Signalgate scandal. Leavitt's attempt to frame media reporting based on such leaks as a smear campaign further strained her relationship with journalists who viewed their work as essential accountability reporting. The controversy over Leavitt's handling of press briefings extended beyond specific policy issues to encompass broader concerns about the administration's media strategy. A New York Times analysis claimed she relied on planted stooges in the press room to field softball questions, enabling her to push administration talking points with minimal scrutiny. While this characterization may have been overblown, there were legitimate questions about the systematic favoring of sympathetic outlets and the marginalization of those perceived as critical. Leavitt's personal style also became a subject of discussion. Her practice of praying with staff before briefings, reported by the Washington Post, sparked controversy when social media users characterized it as a vile PR stunt, a criticism that supporters viewed as an unfair attack on her sincere religious expression. This incident highlighted how even aspects of Leavitt's personal approach to the job had become politicized in the intensely partisan environment of Washington. The cumulative effect of these controversies was a press secretary increasingly viewed through polarized lenses. Supporters, particularly on conservative platforms like Fox News and accounts like @Vigilant Fox on X, praised her for shattering media narratives and standing firm against what they perceived as hostile questioning. Critics, meanwhile, saw a propagandist who prioritized loyalty to Trump over factual accuracy and transparent communication with the American public. This division was evident in the contrasting ways her performance was characterized. To her supporters, Leavitt was a bold defender of Trump's agenda who refused to be intimidated by a biased press corps. To her critics, she was unprofessional, evasive, and increasingly overwhelmed by the demands of a job for which she lacked the necessary experience. The reality, as is often the case, was more nuanced than either of these extreme characterizations. Leavitt's youth and relative inexperience were undoubtedly factors in her struggles, but many of the issues stemmed from deliberate strategic choices rather than simple mistakes. The decision to prioritize new media over traditional outlets, the confrontational approach to questioning, and the willingness to make statements without solid factual grounding all reflected a specific vision of how the White House should engage with the press, one that prioritized message discipline and base mobilization over broad public information. This approach had historical precedents in previous administrations, particularly during Trump's first term, when press secretaries like Sean Spicer and Kayleigh McEnany often adopted similarly combative stances toward the media. What distinguished Leavitt's tenure, however, was the intensity and frequency of the confrontations, as well as the backdrop of specific controversies like Signalgate that demanded more nuanced handling. The aftermath of these tumultuous weeks was predictable, a significant erosion of Leavitt's credibility with large segments of the media and public. Even outlets that had initially been supportive began to express reservations about her approach, concerned that the constant controversies were overshadowing the administration's policy agenda. The question of whether she could effectively serve as the public face of the White House became a topic of open speculation. Particularly damaging was the perception that Leavitt was not merely struggling, but actively misleading the public. Her unsubstantiated claim about hundreds of countries engaging in trade negotiations, her unsupported accusation that Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia was involved in human trafficking, and her insistence that the Signalgate messages did not constitute war plans, all contributed to a growing sense that factual accuracy was not a priority in her communications strategy. This approach had real-world consequences beyond the political sphere. Markets reacted to her confusing statements on tariff policies, with investors struggling to discern the administration's actual intentions. International allies and adversaries alike found it difficult to interpret the administration's positions when they were presented in such contradictory terms. And ordinary Americans seeking clear information about government policies were left with more questions than answers after many of her briefings. It's worth noting that Leavitt's struggles occurred against a backdrop of significant policy challenges. The administration was grappling with complex issues related to immigration, trade, national security, and economic policy, all areas where clear, consistent communication was essential. The controversy surrounding her briefing style and factual accuracy made it more difficult to effectively convey the administration's approach to these crucial matters. Some critics have argued that Leavitt's difficulties were symptomatic of broader issues within the administration, a preference for loyalty over expertise, a reflexive hostility toward traditional media, and a willingness to sacrifice factual precision for political advantage. Others have suggested that she was hampered by impossible expectations, tasked with defending controversial policies in a media environment that was predominantly skeptical, if not openly hostile. What's clear is that the series of press briefings we've examined represented a significant failure of political communication, regardless of one's ideological perspective. Even viewed in the most charitable light, these events did not achieve achieve their presumed objective of effectively conveying the administration's positions and priorities to the American public. Instead, they became the story themselves, distracting from, rather than highlighting the work of the government. What is beyond dispute is that these press briefings marked a significant moment in the evolving relationship between the White House and the media, a relationship that remains essential to the functioning of American democracy, regardless of the administration in power or the individuals who represent it to the public. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, be sure to check out the cards popping up on your screen.